Hey folks, so today we're going to be talking about paraphrases, quotations, and citations. Okay, this is very important. So please make sure that you understand what each of these things are and how we need to use them in our work. So, what this presentation is going to cover is what is a paraphrase, what is a quotation, when do you need to use an in-text citation, and how do you format an in-text citation. So, what is a paraphrase? Well, a paraphrase is using your own language to convey another author's ideas. Okay? Usually, paraphrase abbreviates a longer piece of a work to make it so that it's more relevant to your argument. So, for paraphrase, you do not use quotation marks, okay? But you do need to use an in-text citation. So, let's see how this works. Right? So here is an example from a text. This is from Kate Chopin's The Story of an Hour. This is paragraphs 2 through 4. So to read it aloud, it was her sister Josephine who told her, in broken sentences, veiled hints that revealed and half concealing. Her husband's friend Richards was there too, near her. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received, with Brentley Mallard's name leading the list of killed. He had only taken the time to assure himself of its truth by a second telegram, and had hastened to forestall any less careful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message. She did not hear the story as many women have heard the same, with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance. She wept at once, with sudden, wild abandonment, in her sister's arms. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room alone. She would have no one follow her. There stood, facing the open window, a comfortable, roomy armchair. Into this she sank, pressed down by a physical exhaustion that haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul. Okay, so there's a 3 paragraph excerpt from The Story of an Hour. So, how can we identify this information in a paraphrase? Well, let's look. So we can say Louise Mallard, after learning of her husband's death, retreats to her room and gazes out the window, lost in thought, right? Each of the things in that sentence occurred in that, 3 paragraph uh, excerpt. So we identify that as Chopin, para 2 through 4. Okay. Now, please notice that there's a period after the para and 2 through 4 because information from each of those paragraphs goes into this paraphrase that we use, right? So we took 3 paragraphs and we trimmed it down to make it something that's easier to deal with and something that provides some context for the reader. So that's how you would create a paraphrase from something longer. Now, you'd always just want to make sure that you are not reusing any of the author's language, that you're not reusing the author's sentence structure, and that you are including an in-text citation. So let's move on to quotations. What is a quotation? Well, a quotation is when you utilize both language and ideas from an author. Okay? Quotations are used to reference a specific point in a text that contributes to your argument. So, for a quotation, you have to use quotation marks to enclose quotations. That means there must be a beginning quotation mark and an ending quotation mark. And those occur at the beginning of the language that you're taking from a source and at the end of the language that you're taking from a source. So a quotation also requires an in-text citation. So how does this look? Well, we'll use the same example. Okay, so I'm not going to reread this same 3 paragraph segment, but if you'd like to, you can pause the video here, reread it, and then move on to the next slide. So what would a quotation from this look like? Well, something like this. When Louise sits in her chair facing the window, Kate Chopin tells the reader that she felt pressed down by a physical exhaustion that haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul. Okay, notice that the quotation is exactly as was presented in the original story. Okay, exactly. If there were punctuation in this, except right before the ending quotation mark, as if that didn't fit into our sentence, we would utilize that. If there are any italics, we would utilize that. If there is any dashes, we would utilize that, right? We make sure that everything is exactly the same, because by putting it in quotation marks, we are attesting that this information comes directly from the source and that you, as the author of this text that you're writing, has not altered it in any way. Okay. Also, please notice that with a quotation, you don't want to begin your sentence with a quotation mark, right? You begin by giving it a little bit of a lead to tell the reader that a quotation is coming. Okay, just something to set the stage. You don't want to all of a sudden dive into a quotation and then have your reader, trying to figure out the context for what's happening. So notice that the in-text citation also for quotation is the same as an in-text citation for paraphrase. They are formatted the same. They just both need to be present in each of these instances. So when do you need an in-text citation when referencing a text? The easy answer is always. Okay, you always need an in-text citation when you're referencing a text. If you are paraphrasing, you need an in-text citation. If you are quoting, you need an in-text citation. Now, there's a few reasons for this. One is because you need to give credit where it's due, right? This other author has come up with this information and has presented it, and you are now essentially borrowing it. So you're crediting them for the work that they've done. And also, it provides your reader with an opportunity to go back and look at the evidence you're presenting. Okay? So you want to make sure that your reader can always go and read further and that they know exactly where to find the information that you're discussing. So, how do you format an in-text citation? Well, there's a few elements that need to be there. Okay, every in-text citation contains these elements: the author's last name, okay, the page number if the source is paginated, and the paragraph number if the source is not paginated. Okay, one thing I want to point out regarding the author's last name is if the author's name is present in your sentence, you don't need to include it in the in-text citation. Okay, because you're already telling your reader, this is who I'm referencing in your sentence. But if your author's last name is not present in your sentence, then you do need to include that in the in-text citation. Now, if you feel like you want to keep it consistent for yourself so that you don't have to remember that there's the difference there, you may use the author's last name in your in-text citation, whether it's present in the sentence or not. Okay, I want you to be the most comfortable with this information and presenting in-text citations. So if you'd like to use the author's last name in the in-text citation, if they're also in the sentence as well, that's perfectly fine. Please note that if the author's name is not present in the sentence, then you need to indicate it in the in-text citation, no matter what. Okay? Now, in reference to page number, what do I mean when I say if the source is paginated? Well, if you look at your source and you see that there's a page number on it, right? If it's page 257, right? That's where you start. You don't want to think of it as, okay, I've now printed out this document. It says it starts on page 257, but this is page 1 for me. No, you want to make sure that you're referencing the page number of the source. So that way, if any person goes back to see more of the argument that you're indicating, or they want to read the primary source that you're working with at that point to get more context, that they know exactly where to go in the edition that you described for them in the works cited page. So if there's a page number, reference the page number as it's presented on each page. Now, if there's no page number, then you'll need to indicate paragraph number because, again, you want your reader to be able to go and check on the information that you're providing for them, okay? And you want to give credit and show where the information came from. Sometimes there's no pagination. Sometimes, especially when we're working with sources from Galileo, they just provide a screen that has just text on it, okay? If that happens, then count out the paragraphs and just indicate that paragraph number. Okay? Now, how does an in-text citation look? Well, an in-text citation looks like these here. Okay? Author last name, X, that's for ones with pagination. It is implied that if you just include the author's last name and the page number, that there is that it's a page that you're looking at. Okay, that's the default. So if you just write Chopin 2, then the reader is going to say, okay, there's pagination on this particular edition. I know that this is page 2. So let me go reference page 2. Now, if there is no if there is no pagination on your source, your in-text citation is going to look like the second one, where it is author's last name, para X. Okay, and X is again the paragraph number. So that would be very similar to the Chopin source that we used in our example, right? You want to make sure that no matter what, your reader has the ability to go and look back at the information that you've presented to them. And we use this standardized formatting to make sure that everyone knows how to read where to find that information. So where does an in-text citation go? In-text citations always appear at the end of the sentence in which the quotation or paraphrase is found. Okay, if your quotation happens to be in the middle of your sentence, do not put the in-text citation directly after that quotation. Okay, put it at the end of the sentence. The reason for that is because your reader will recognize that the information that you're presenting in your in-text citation refers to the information in that particular sentence, and they are not distracted by the presence of an in-text citation in the middle of the sentence. Okay, so make sure that your in-text citations go at the end of the sentences that you are using the information in. So just to go over one last time, this presentation covered what a paraphrase is, what a quotation is, when you need to use an in-text citation, and how you should format an in-text citation. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email, to come pop in during office hours, or to ask in class.